now in session with the Honorable David Stewart presiding.
Please be seated.
Have your attention, please. Rob, you make sure that your cell phones are turned off. So we don't walk off proceedings. Thank you.
Number 3 on the docket, the People versus Kevin Warren, 11-1182 FH.
Brenna Taylor on behalf of the people.
John Shea, Your Honor, with and on behalf of Mr. Warren for sentencing.
Your Honor, today is the date and time scheduled for sentencing, and I believe both parties are prepared to proceed. Has the court had an opportunity to read the people's sentencing memorandum?
I have.
And has the court had an opportunity to read the defense
I
counsel's
have.
sentencing
I've read
memorandum?
both sentencing memorandums and all of the letters that have been submitted on behalf of both sides.
Okay, Your Honor, then I'm going to confine myself first with corrections to the pre-sentence
Sure.
investigation report if I can.
You may.
If we could go to the face sheet of the pre-sentence investigation report.
Yes.
Under the heading plea agreement,
Yes.
where it says sentencing agreement, it should say to MDOC sentence within guidelines.
No objection to that.
So ordered.
That same error is repeated on page 2 of the body of the report, Your Honor. At the very top, the very first sentence, the end of it should say within the guidelines. It's on page 2 of the body of the report.
Yes.
There is an addition that I would like to make on page 2 of the body of the report, Your Honor.
Uh-huh.
At the agent's description of the offense, the second paragraph of that, the very last line talks about the PBT result.
Yes.
I believe the court should add and a blood result of .12.
I think that's in the previous sentence.
Oh, it does.
It is, you're
Thank
right.
you. I apologize. Thank you very much.
All right.
And we only have one, and that is on page page 8 of the report, near the bottom in the liabilities section where it says credit card, the monthly amount, that should be $500 monthly.
I'll strike that 0. Okay.
And that's borne out by the narrative on below it. That's all we have in terms of corrections to the pre-sentence report itself.
All right.
As for the guidelines, Your Honor, if the court has read the people's sentencing memorandum and the defendant's sentencing memorandum, we have made our guidelines arguments there. And I guess the court needs to now make a ruling. I believe that the only two guidelines that were at issue were OV5 and OV17.
That's correct.
That is correct, and we're content to rely on the memorandum which we've submitted.
Right.
Actually, since one of mine I left ambiguous,
Okay.
let me say that with respect to OV17, the
Yes.
defense does not have an objection to that being scored 5. I think it may be hard to score that 0, but we certainly don't believe it should be scored 10.
Yes.
And we don't have an objection to it being scored 5.
And absent the court wanting additional argument from me, I'll rely on the brief that I filed.
With respect to OV17, that was the one with regard to the degree of defendant's negligence.
Correct.
The court believes that 5 points would be appropriate, but not more than that. It certainly showed a degree of carelessness for sure, but I don't think that there's been a showing of willful wanton disregard. So I think properly scored at 5 points. With respect to OV5, the court believes that that would be appropriately scored at 0.
Cannot quickly do that math, Your Honor. I think 70,
Yes.
70 points, yes.
which is a 5, which makes the range 19 to 38.
That is correct.
We agree.
Okay. Did you have any victim impact statements that you'd want to put on this time?
Yes, Your Honor. If I may ask the victim's family to step forward.
You
There's
may.
3 members, Your Honor. There'll be 4 standing here. One of them just needs a
Yeah,
support.
that's fine. That's fine.
Speaking. Sir, if you could please step to the podium and let the judge know what your first and last name is, and you need to spell it because we need to make a record of that,
Okay.
okay?
I'm Gerard Lillie, Gerardlillie.
Yes, sir. What would you like to say?
Thank you, Your Honor. I've been blessed to have 3 wonderful older brothers. All of them had a profound influence on me as I grew up. Each of them taught me so much about life and how to live it in an honorable way. I'm so very lucky that I can still talk to 2 of them, Ben and Jean. Unfortunately, I'll never be able to talk to Gary again, although I talk to his spirit quite a lot. Gary was a good and kind person, and I have such wonderful memories of him. He had one of the biggest smiles you've ever seen, a smile that would light up a room. And his laugh was as big as they come. I can still hear him laughing as though he was in the next room. I also don't think there's a better story and joke teller than Gary. He was very personable and could make friends with anybody and make strangers feel completely at ease. Some of my very best memories of Gary are from the first few years after he returned from Vietnam. I was a young teenager living at home, and hockey was my sport. I played forward. Gary was a very good goalie and played with some high-level amateur teams in the Detroit metro area before going to Vietnam. Those were the days before goalies wore masks, and I remember him getting hit in the face with sticks and pucks many times. To make a long story short, he talked with Lefty Wilson, the legendary trainer of the Detroit Red Wings, into making a mask for him, since he had made one for Terry Sawchuk, Detroit's legendary goalie. It was one of the very first goalie masks ever made. It was white, and Gary thought that if he painted it black, it might intimidate players coming in on him to see a goalie in a black mask. It's probably the first painted goalie mask in history. That was Gary, always thinking. He was this way throughout his life. He was an extremely bright and creative guy. When he first came back from Vietnam and started playing hockey with his buddies, I just assumed I would play with them. I didn't know until years later that he was pretty worried about taking his kid brother along with him to play with his friends, who were all 10 years older or more than I was. But it worked out, and I was good enough to play with them. I couldn't wait for the weekend when I could play with him and his friends. We played in Windsor Saturday night from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Then we would drive about 25 miles to Tilbury, Ontario, where we would play with another set of his friends from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. In between, we would try and sleep in Gary's car. Well, Gary did. He could sleep anywhere in those days. We would then go into the hockey locker room and spread out our equipment and hoped it would thaw out before we got suited up again. I know it sounds horrible to most people, but it was the best thing in my life at that time. I simply couldn't wait to play hockey with my big brother. So many memories flood in when thinking of Gary. When my wife Alice and I were first married, Gary had bought a large, beautiful old home on Ann Arbor's west side. It's just a few blocks from here. Alice and I lived there for almost 10 years while I attended the University of Michigan. I remember many dinners we had there with him. One of his many talents was being a great cook, as is Alice. I reaped many great dinners from that duo. One weekend, Alice, Gary, and I went up to a cabin he co-owned with some of his friends on the Black River in northern Michigan. One night we spread out a blanket and lay on our backs, looking up in awe at an incredible display of the northern lights. I remember driving in the countryside looking for deer, birds, or any other wildlife we could see. But what I remember most is his smile and his laugh, which were infectious. At Gary's memorial service at the Washington County Vietnam Veterans Memorial, my brothers and I were struck by the number of veterans that were there and the depth of feeling they had for Gary. It was very comforting to experience that. Being involved with the vets was his true calling, actually. My brothers and I heard from many vets about how he helped save their lives, and in so doing, I think it helped save his. I told the vets that day that all along I thought Gary had 3 brothers, when in reality he had many, many brothers and sisters. At my brother Ben's 50th party, I said a few words about Ben and what a great person he is. Afterward, Gary came up to me, put his arm around me, and told me what I said was beautiful, and he hoped I could say those kinds of things about him one day. I can. I only wish he was here in person to hear them. I want to thank Detective Robert Losey and his staff for doing an excellent job investigating the accident scene and dealing with our family in such a compassionate way. I want to thank Prosecutor Brenda Taylor for her concern and understanding and clearly explaining the arduous process culminating in today's sentencing. And I want to thank victims advocate Leanne Kaiser for her care and compassion throughout this difficult year and a half. Thank you.
Thank you.
You need to state your full name and spell your first and last.
Okay. My name is Merritt Lillie, MERRITTLILLIE. I too want to sincerely thank you, Your Honor, for this opportunity to share what Gary meant to me and the impact of his death on our family and friends. And I do want to also thank Leanne and Brenda and Detective Lucy and everyone else who has helped us along this most difficult journey. I am Gary's niece, in fact, his only niece. I am also the daughter of Bernard Lillie, his eldest brother, who has been largely responsible for Gary's estate and the extensive legal proceedings that have been endured to get us to this point today. Gary was not just a victim. He was a son to my grandparents, Ben and Anna. He was a brother to Ben, to Jean, to Gerard and Alice, and all of his fellow veterans. He was a lover and companion to Lynn, an uncle to myself, Dirk, Scott, Mark, Erica, Tora, and Drew. He was a father figure to Dustin and a friend to John and Jane, Jack, Madeline, George and Lois, the whole Morrison family, Jenner, Cart, and countless others. He was a mentor to many and an advocate for thousands. He was also a business owner, a leader, a confidant, a veteran, and an inspiration. If everyone who cherished Gary had the opportunity to speak about the impact his death has had on them, we would be here for days. For all of us that love him, nothing has been the same since his life was stolen from him and from us so prematurely. Gary's untimely death has had a serious impact on my family. Through this whole process, I have not slept as I should. I have laid in bed awake, crying countless nights, not just mourning the loss of Gary, but also for the realistic fear that this whole process would bring more victims. The stress, the heartache, the constant traveling, the countless court dates. I have truly lived a hell that my father or my Uncle Gene would have a heart attack or stroke from this stress and turmoil. I still go back and read the email exchanges that Gary and I so frequently shared. I watch and listen to the interviews that he has done and radio shows he hosted. I listen and watch so that I can hear his laugh and to see his face and see him alive and smiling, doing God's work on this earth. I loathe the fact that Kevin Warren took away my ability to email him and get a reply. I can no longer send him messages about the funny things that my son does or says, or about my daughter Tora's hockey games and read his proud, boastful replies. He will never again be able to come and watch her play a game. Erica and Tora, Gary's great nieces, are seniors in high school this year, and he is not here to share some of their most memorable moments with us. Kevin Warren has robbed me and my uncles, my cousins, and our children of the joy of sharing these special moments with him. My daughter Tora adored and admired Gary. She wrote a beautiful, poignant essay about he was a hero to her and how deeply his death has affected her. We were camping at the fairgrounds that fateful August week when Kevin Warren's actions ended Gary's life. My daughter was competing in equestrian events with her 4-H group when we got the call early that morning informing us that Gary had been killed by a drunk driver, and everything changed. We had to pack up all of our belongings, her animals, a campsite. My daughter missed all the events she trained all year for while grieving and trying to deal with the loss of her uncle. My son, who is now only 5 years old, will never know him like my daughter was able to, nor will Dustin's son, Austin. Kevin Warren's actions ruined the opportunity for these innocent children to receive the love, inspiration, pride, joy, and wisdom that Gary brought to the rest of us during his time on earth. There is no denying that it was poor decisions and irresponsible actions that caused the untimely death of my beloved Uncle Gary. Kevin Warren made the reckless choice to drink to such an excess that day and night, and he alone chose to get behind the wheel of his Chevy Avalanche with no regard to himself or others. These irresponsible acts resulted in the death of an innocent man, a community man, a man who didn't even drink alcohol, who was simply taking a peaceful evening walk down his country road. The loss of Gary is immeasurable and indescribable in words. He was a man that lived his life to help others. He was kind, loving, creative, and hardworking. Through his own life and actions, he taught us all about the important things in life, like generosity, loyalty, honesty, faith, brotherhood, forgiveness, freedom, compassion, and love. My father will be the next and last person to speak. He has found the strength to be able to forgive and hold sympathy for Mr. Warren, and recognizes that this must be a horrible tragedy for his family as well. While my heart does ache for Mr. Warren's family, I cannot put that empathy for them above the immense pain, the sadness, loss, and hurt that my family and Gary's loved ones have all endured, and the empty hole that has been left in each one of our hearts.
You need to state your full name and spell it, okay?
My name is Bernard George Lillie, Bernard, George Lillie. I'm Gary's oldest brother. I too would like to thank Brenda, Detective Losey, and Leanne Kaiser, not only for the outstanding work that they did on Gary's behalf, but also for being so approachable throughout the process. When my two remaining brothers and I think of my brother Gary, a number of great times we had with him come to mind. The times we spent fishing and hunting at our parents' cottage just outside Sheboygan, as well as fishing and hunting trips to Canada. On one of those trips, we were driving into Chapleau, Ontario, and our trailer got a flat tire. We left Gary, who was then 16, on the side of the road to watch over the trailer while we drove to Chapleau to buy a tire. When we got back to where we left Gary on the trailer, he was up in a tree. He said a moose chased him there. I told him he just got scared being alone miles from nowhere. On later hunting trips with our father and brothers, it became a favorite story, and we would tell it around the campfires and would all laugh. Gary always had a great laugh and laughed easily and often. Years later, Gary joined the Navy and became a Seabee. At the age of 26, he volunteered to go to Vietnam, where he spent part of 1966 and 1967. As a Seabee, Gary's job was in constructing barracks, airports, and other projects, but he said he was involved in several firefights. He told me after one particular battle he saw dead Marines and Viet Cong soldiers mingled together. One of the Viet Cong soldiers looked to be about 16, and he said he would always remember the smile on his face and how it haunted him for years afterward. About 1970, Gary moved to Ann Arbor and started his own real estate business and eventually became a broker, which he did up to his death. Gary was well known in the business. As one brokerage agent I met at the memorial service held for Gary told me, Gary was one of the most knowledgeable brokers he ever knew. While heading his own business, over the years, Gary showed his compassionate side. He hired several young men and mentored them through high school and college. And when they graduated, they became successful businessmen and attribute their success in no small part to Gary. I imagine those boys were the kids Gary never had himself. But perhaps the real story of our brother is the other life Gary led, his life dedicated to his other family, the Vietnam veterans of America, and his extended family, any and all veterans he could reach out to. Shortly after his death, I was sitting in Gary's home, situated between Ann Arbor and Dexter. It was a small house he built on 10 acres, but it was built with Gary's own hands with the help of several of his friends and the skills he learned as a Seabee. Over the course of some 35 years, Gary nurtured that 10 acres, and it eventually became a haven for waterfowl in the ponds he had dug and filled, and the woods and pastures for the numerous deer and fox that wandered through it. Gary loved that place. It was somewhere he could go to relax and watch his animals and beloved cats. Sadly, since his death, the property has been repossessed. As I was sitting there that day thinking of Gary and how he had been taken from us, a close friend of Gary's came by. He, like Gary, was a Vietnam veteran. Over the course of our conversation, I asked him how it was that Gary, a Seabee, who wasn't really involved in the actual day-to-day shooting war, was a victim of post-traumatic stress syndrome that affects so many fighting men and women. He went on to tell me how Gary, through his contact with veterans from all wars, had contracted the disease. Gary, he said, got PTSD through assimilating those veteran struggles. By taking on their problems and issues himself, Gary became a victim of PTSD. I was amazed by what he told me. In the 17 months since Gary's death, my brothers and I have come to see just how little we actually knew of our brother Gary's involvement with veterans. We knew of his work with the Vietnam Veterans chapter he belonged to, at one time or other filling roles as a chapter officer, his part in Vietnam Veterans Radio he helped start, oftentimes being the voice of the program as he interviewed guests, trips all over the United States to Vietnam Veterans Affairs, and of course to the wall, and various fundraising events, one of which was to help in the building of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Ypsilanti, where his memorial service was held. Several years before his death, Gary went back to Vietnam and back to a hill in the Chu Lai district where he was based. There, through a Vietnamese interpreter, he met an old Vietnamese man who told him he too had fought on that same hill for the Viet Cong, possibly at the same time Gary was there. Gary had a small pine tree and bag of soil from his 10 acres he took with him, and some incense. Gary and his former enemy planted the pine tree together, burned the incense, and each in their own way prayed for the brave dead soldiers of both sides. Gary came back from that trip, he told me, a changed man, able to finally rid himself of the demons that had haunted him all those years. I miss my brother Gary. As a Vietnam veteran, he was my real-life hero. I miss talking about our hunting and fishing trips, how he was so proud that he had the third goalie mask ever made that he wore back in the 1960s, and that the National Hockey League wants it for their Hall of Fame. I miss his compassion and love when he talked about his involvement with his beloved veterans. I miss our discussions about politics. I miss his infectious laughter. I miss my brother. I'm glad my parents weren't here to see how he died. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I thank you for taking 3 statements. I don't know that I could add another single thing to that, Your Honor. Our agreement has the court sentencing the defendant to a prison sentence within the guidelines, 19 months to 38. I have made my arguments in my sentencing brief, and I would like the court's last words on the behalf of the people to be what you heard from the victim's family.
Thank you. Mr. Shea?
Thank you, Your Honor. I find these to be my most difficult cases because they involve horrible tragedy, and it's tragedy that oftentimes a good person is inflicting on another good person, and I don't think there's any dispute that that Gary Lillie was a good man and a very valuable asset to this community, not just to his family and friends, but to the community at large. From everything I've read, everything I've heard. Kevin Warren, likewise, is a good man. He's lived a good life, raising his son. He's worked for the same employer for 30 years. He's a loyal and generous friend. He's a great support to his family, his extended family as well as his immediate family. And it's just a painful fact of life that sometimes good men make serious mistakes that have horrible consequences, and this is one of those cases. I I want to say that there are people out there who could commit an act like this and hunker down in a hole and hope that they were never found out. I think the best thing, I certainly can't excuse Mr. Warren driving drunk and killing somebody. I mean, there's no explanation, good explanation, there's no excuse for the action. But what I can say is, at least he called. You know, at least when he got home and he said, I've got second thoughts, he didn't just go to bed like so many would do. He went back. And then he went back home, and he probably made the hardest phone call he's ever had to make. And then he spoke with the officer that night, and he took responsibility. So I think that's to his great credit. It certainly is no comfort to the people who have lost a loved one, but I think it's a credit to Mr. Warren. It is oftentimes difficult for victims' families to bear up under the length of the legal process, and this case has taken some time to resolve. I don't think it's certainly not the longest case I've ever been involved in, but it's also not the shortest. And some of it was my fault due to my own schedule. Some of it were issues that needed to be resolved. It's unfortunate because it does create a burden on families. I can say that Mr. Warren was never aggressive with me about seeking a trial, that he wanted to resolve it. It takes time, and it took time here. And for whatever part I had in lengthening it, I certainly didn't do it on purpose, but I apologize to the extent it caused anybody additional pain. Mr. Warren is here to accept the court's punishment, he's gonna do his time, whatever it is you tell him it's gonna be, and he's gonna come out and he's gonna be a better person for it. I don't think I have anything else.
Mr. Warren, is there anything you'd like to say before sentence?
I'd like to tell Mr. Lillie's family, friends, and the community how sorry I am for what I did on the night of the accident. I can't ask for your forgiveness because I'll never forgive myself, but I do hope in time you can find peace in your heart. I'd also like to apologize to my son, my mom, my girlfriend, my ex-wife, and all my family, friends, and coworkers, and thank them for the unconditional support they've given me. The choices I made on the night of the accident were both selfish and irresponsible, and I deserve to be punished for them. But I don't feel they define the person I am. I've lived my life with respect for the law, and I've tried helping people my whole life, whether I knew them directly or not. I made a lot of bad decisions on the night of the accident. The only good decision I made was calling 911, and regardless of the outcome today, it's the only thing I won't regret doing that night. From the first day that I met with John, I told him under no circumstances would I take this to trial. It's my belief that a trial should be reserved for somebody that is unjustly accused of a crime, and that's not the case with me. I'm guilty with what I'm charged with today. I'm very sorry to everyone that has been affected by this, and to the people that I let down that count on me. It'll never happen again.
Well, as everyone has pointed out, it's a terrible tragedy for everybody involved. It's a tragedy for Mr. Lillie and his family and friends. It's a tragedy for Mr. Warren and his family and friends, and himself, of course. And frankly, nothing that I do can bring back Mr. Lillie. It's just a tragedy. The law requires that these things be dealt with. The legislature has decided to make guidelines that we are bound by in terms of sentencing options. And I've read the pre-sentence report, and I've read, of course, all the letters in support of Mr. Lillie's family and the concerns they had, and of course the number of letters from family and friends of Mr. Warren. And it seems to me that justice is best served in this case with a sentence of 19 months to 15 years, Michigan Department of Corrections, credit for 1 day served. Restitution in the amount of $5,236 is to be made payable to Gerard and Alice Lillie for funeral expenses and associated family travel expenses, as well as $1,228.03 payable to Bernard Lillie for the cremation of the victim and associated travel expenses for Bernard Lillie as a condition of parole. A $68 state cost and $130 crime victim assessment are ordered as required by statute. Costs in the amount of $1,611 are imposed. You may be entitled to appellate review of your conviction and sentence. If you are unable to afford an attorney to represent you on appeal, the court would appoint an attorney and furnish the attorney with portions of the transcript and record the attorney needs. Request for the appointment of an attorney must be made in writing, sent directly to the court at the address noted on the form you've been handed within 42 days.
Thank you, Judge.
You're welcome. Court's in recess.